Hi, everybody. We're at Masechet Pesahim, Daf 27, and we are talking about baking something with food that is prohibited to derive benefit from. So in general, we're talking about deriving something that you can't derive benefit. Let's say it's wood. So wood, if you make a bench out of it, you're not allowed to sit on it. All right, so that would be a typical way of deriving benefit. Using something like that for fuel, and we started this whole thing because of chametz, and whether can you derive benefit from burning chametz, right, by putting it in your oven and cooking with it. So burning something is particularly interesting, first of all, because you actually are destroying it as you're burning it. So at some point during the burning process, it's not even chametz, it's not even that substance anymore. And second, which the point we're going to start with now is that is that heat really a direct benefit, right? If we burn something and then they use that heat to create bread, right? Does the bread contain some prohibited substance in it, like the energy of the bread somehow goes into it and makes the bread not allowed, or not? So that's the opening machloket that we have. So that's the Baraita. We already were introduced to it yesterday. Let's review it because this Baraita is going to be the subject of the entire daf. We're going to go through every section of the Baraita and explain it. So let's remember what the Baraita said. You have an oven and you fueled it with things that are prohibited like orlah or kilayim. And if it's a new oven, then you have to destroy it, because then that heat, that the oven gets hardened and is improved because of the heat, and therefore every subsequent time you use the oven, it's also you're benefiting from that original hardening. Whereas if it's a used oven and you bake this in it, just wait till it cools down. Nothing in the oven changed, so therefore you're not benefiting from that one time that you heated it up. That's the first part. Now, if you make baked bread in it with that fuel that was prohibited, Rabbi says you're not allowed to eat that bread, and Chachamim say it's okay, you can eat that bread. That's part two. Part three of the Baraita says if it's reduced to coals, by which they mean not coals from that you mine, but rather ashes of the wood, right? Then everyone agrees it's permitted, because at that point it burned down to ashes and you're just using the leftover heat of it in order to cook. It's not material anymore that would be prohibited. Okay, so those are the three sections. And now we're going to try to figure out actually who is the author of this. So this is where we'll start. Emor de shamat le Rabbi mishum diyesh shevach etzim bapat. Ze veze gorem mishamat le. So let me show you in the outline first, right? So the Rabbi says the bird is prohibited. The sages permit. Now, who says this opinion? That we know, but who says the second opinion, the second part of it, that a new oven that's heated by orlah fuel has to be broken, right? Who would say that? Well, at first sight, it looks like it would be Rabbi. Why? Because Rabbi prohibits the bread. Why does he prohibit the bread? He thinks that the heat energy that was in these twigs from orlah is transferred into the bread, and just like milk that falls into meat makes the meat prohibited, so too this heat energy from the orlah twigs goes into the bread, and the bread itself becomes prohibited. Right, so that must be that's what he thinks, and therefore you could say the same thing regarding the oven. If it's an old oven, it has no benefit from it. It's the same old oven after it cools down. But if it's a new oven, then the heat energy from those prohibited twigs is going to go and cause that oven to be hardened, and that benefit remains in that oven, which means every time you use the oven, every time you bake something in it, you are deriving benefit from those. That energy of those original twigs. And so therefore it looks like certainly the sages would not, if they permit the bread, they would also permit the oven. And so therefore must be Rabbi, he's the one that says that the new oven has to be broken. Okay, this seems like a good presumption. However, in order for it to be Rabbi, he would have to add another presumption, which is as follows. What happens if an action is caused by two things, one prohibited and one permitted, and you need both of those things in order to achieve the result? Is that allowed or not allowed? Well, let's see. In this case, you have the oven. The oven, the new oven that was heated one time with prohibited items. So the oven has an element of prohibition that's going into the next batch of bread that you make next week. But the next time you use the oven, you're using permitted fuel, right? You're taking just regular branches. And so now you have a combination. The new bread, the bread that you make in subsequent occasions, is the result of permitted wood, permitted fuel, and the oven that one time benefited from being hardened by prohibited. So it's a result of a combination of prohibited and permitted. So in order to say that Rabbi is the author of this law, that the oven has to be broken, you'd have to assume, first of all, that the benefit of the wood is in the bread or in the oven itself, and that a combination action is prohibited. And we never found that Rabbi actually says that. So you can't assume that Rabbi is the author of this statement, right? So diyesh shevach besim bapat, that he says, ze vazeh gorem. That's how the Talmud says. When you have two causes, one allowed and one not allowed. Mishmat le, did Rabbi ever say this? He never said that. So you can't presume that Rabbi is the author of that law. Ela la kash. Okay, sorry. So we already said yesterday, right? So ela la kasha. Now we're going to a new answer. Ela la kasha, ha Rabbi Eliezer, ha Rabbanan. So rather, you know what? This is actually, we're going to introduce a new person here, Rabbi Eliezer. He's the one that says, ze vazeh gorem. And so he's the one that says a new oven has to be broken. And the other opinion that says a new oven is okay to use, here, that's this Baraita. We had a second Baraita that says, Ben Chadash, Ben Yashan, Yusan. Just let it cool down and it's fine. That must be the opinion of Rabbanan who go against Rabbi Eliezer. They would say, even if you use prohibited fuel the first time, the next time you use the oven, it's okay because you're using also permitted fuel, and the prohibited oven, that's zevazeh gorem, is permitted. So now what we're going to try to look for is places where Rabbi Eliezer says zevazeh gorem is prohibited. And if he says that in other places, then we know that he would be the opinion behind our first Baraita. All right, good. Hey, Rabbi Eliezer, where do we find Rabbi Eliezer that says that multiple causes is still prohibited? Ilem Rabbi Eliezer disor ditnan. So I have Mishnah Masechet Orlah regarding leaven. Seor shel chulin v'shel terumah shenaflu letoch isa. Ve'en bazeh kedei lachmis ve'en bazeh kedei lachmis. Okay, we're talking about terumah. We want to know if the result is going to be terumah. In general, we're not talking about, it's not Pesach. In general, terumah, if it falls into more than 100, is batel. That's true for all things. However, if it's causing a significant change in the item, then even 1 in 1,000 will still not be batel. You probably know this law from cheese. If you take a little bit of animal rennet and put it into a lot of milk, it's still a problem. It's still not kosher, because even though it's more than 1 in 60, it's causing it to become cheese. So it's very significant. So too here, a little bit of leaven, right, that goes into even more than 100. Well, if that leaven, let's say it's terumah, and that terumah is enough to cause the whole dough to rise, then it would be prohibited. But we're talking about a case where I have a tiny bit of leaven that's chulin, a tiny bit of leaven that's terumah. Each one by itself would not be enough to make the bread rise. And so each one by itself would be batel. But together, these two pieces of leaven are enough. So do I say that the prohibited and the permitted come together as ze vazeh gorem? And it would be, what's the law? Eliezer omer, achad acharon aniba. He says you follow the last one. Why? If I put the permitted one in first, and that did its work, but not yet enough, and then the terumah is the last straw. That's what caused it to become chametz. That's what caused it to become bread, and that's therefore the whole thing is considered terumah. The other way around, if I put the terumah first, terumah didn't do anything yet, batel, and then I put the chulin, then the whole thing is considered chulin. Good, that makes sense. It goes by the last one. We don't have a proof yet for ze vazeh gorem. Chachamim omrim ben shenafal yisur lechatechila ben shenafal yisur labasof leolam eno oser ad shebo kedei lachmis. the Chachamim are the most lenient, and they say a little piece of this, doesn't matter which order you put them in, unless you have enough terumah for it to make it leaven, it's not going to be terumah, right? And so you don't combine things. Now, regarding Rabbi Eliezer, we have a clarification. Amar Abaye, lo shanu ela shekadam v'silek et ha'isur, aval lo kadam v'silek et ha'isur, asur, al ma'azeh v'azeh gorem asur. So the Rabbi says that Rabbi Eliezer, when he said his law, that it's the last one, he's only said that when he would only say that it's permitted when the last one is the cholin, when, let's say the terumah fell in first, you took out that original piece of leaven, right? And it has some effect, but you took out that original piece, and then the other part falls in. Then it's okay. But if not, if you didn't take it out, and the terumah is still in there, and the cholin still in there, then you do apply zeh v'zeh gorem, and it's prohibited. So he's adding a little bit of stringency to what we would have thought in Rabbi Eliezer's words, but that's how he explains it. And therefore, you see, according to this Abaye's explanation, anytime I have both of them in there, it's going to be problematic. And so therefore, he would similarly say, we'll go back regarding the oven. When they have the oven that was heated and was from a source of prohibition, but with fuel that's permitted, and both of them are going into that, baking that bread, that would be a problem, because that's zeh v'zeh gorem. All right, so we seem to have an author, but we're going to reject this because it relies on Abaye. Who says Abaye is the authoritative opinion? Who says that that's what Rabbi Eliezer really meant? Maybe it's what he says simply. You follow the last one, not because then you have a chance to take something else out. It doesn't matter if you took out the original piece or didn't take out the original piece. If they fell in together, maybe he really would say it's okay. So if they fall in together and he thinks it's okay, then zeh v'zeh gorem is mutar, right? And he's only prohibits when the terumah is last, because the terumah is doing the whole effect at that point, right? Whatever it was before, the terumah is finishing it off. And so according to the simple interpretation of his words, he does not say zeh v'zeh gorem. And therefore, Rabbi Eliezer, that Rabbi Eliezer is not it. Instead, we're going to have to find a different one, a different place that Rabbi Eliezer says something. Okay, and so here's the second version. Okay, forget that. Okay, I'm sorry. Ella, Rabbi Eliezer de Atzeh Asherah. So rather, it must be a different place that Rabbi Eliezer speaks, and this is in Mishnah in Masechet Avodah Zarah, where he says, Natal hemena esim asurin behana'a, hisik bahen et tanur, chadash yutas, yashan yusan. Okay, before we had a similar case talking about orlah or kilayim, but now we're talking about an Asherah tree. And I take some branches from an Asherah tree, that's Avodah Zarah, I'm not allowed to derive any benefit from it. If I use it to heat up an oven, then if the oven is new, I have to destroy the oven. And if it's old, then I just have to wait till it cools down. Okay, this everyone agrees now. If you made bread in that oven, you're not allowed to eat the bread. If that piece of bread, which is prohibited, got mixed up with others, and then one of that mixture itself got separated and mixed with others, so it got mixed up and twice. All of them, right? It fell into 10, and then one of those 10 fell into another 10. Nevertheless, they're all prohibited. That's the first opinion. Rabbi Eliezer, that's the main opinion, right? Everyone agrees. Everyone agrees with that. Okay, now a tangent. This is not relevant for us. Rabbi Eliezer omer yolich hana aliyam hamelach melach amar lo en pidyon avodah zara. Rabbi Eliezer says that what are you going to do? You have all these, 100 or maybe 1,000 loaves, and it got mixed up in a mixture. What are you going to do? You're going to just get rid of all of them? No, all you have to do is take the monetary worth of one of the loaves and throw it into the Dead Sea. if you just throw it into a regular sea, maybe someone will find it, right? You got to throw it into the Dead Sea so that you lose the monetary value. And by doing that, then you can derive benefit because you already lost that amount of that benefit, and then you can go and eat the rest of them. But the Chachamim say to him, no, you cannot redeem Avodah Zarah. And therefore, since any one of these might be it, Avodah Zarah is, not batel b'mashehu. And so they're all not allowed. Okay, you can disregard this section. It's not relevant for us. The point is the one before. The fact that everyone here agrees that this oven, even when it's new, has to be destroyed. And we don't say that, well, the oven in the future will be used with regular, good, kosher fuel. And that would be zeva zegorem. Nobody says that. Including Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim here, right? So all opinions. So therefore, it's Rabbi Eliezer and maybe Chachamim too of this Mishnah, that would be the same as our source. Okay, this seems like a directly relevant source for us. It's exact same case, except it's regarding Asherah. Good. Now we have an author, right? Oh, not so fast. Emur de shamat le Rabbi Eliezer ba'avodah zarah de chamir isura b'shar isun shebatorah mi shamat le. Rabbi Eliezer only said that law of zez v'zegorem is prohibited regarding idolatry, but that's a very stringent thing. You see, it's not even batel and anything. But other things, orlah, kedai kerem, maybe he wouldn't say that. Ela imken aman teramya. All right, fine. Now you're really giving us a hard time. So who's going to be the author? We ran out of possibilities. So this is by process of elimination, right? It's got to be Eliezer because there's no one else that can fit the bill. And by the way, we happen to have an explicit Baraita. Ve'od hatanya behedya. Ve'chen haya Rabbi Eliezer oser bechol yisurin shebat Torah. He said this law that we said regarding Asherah, he applied the same thing to everywhere else. Good, thank you. You had this Baraita the whole time, right? And you're now we know it. Okay, good. So now we have the source for this opinion. All right, and now we're going to do is look at a couple of side points regarding this. Right, this is by Asherah. Now, status of a pot made in an oven heated by prohibited fuel. Okay, let's say this very interesting case. Amar Abaye, im timsa lomar ze vaze gorem asur, Rabbi hainu Rabbi Eliezer. Now, Rabbi, we said before, maybe he's the author because he said that the fuel, the prohibition of the fuel goes into the bread, and but we weren't sure if Rabbi also agrees ze vaze gorem asur. That's why we looked for Rabbi Eliezer. We're still not sure what Rabbi thinks. If he in fact agrees, then he would be the same as Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. But what if he thinks it's zeva gozem is allowed, but he also thinks that the fuel goes into the item and makes it prohibited? So regarding bread, in this case, the bread is made with prohibited fuel. All right, I'm talking about the first case, the first time you make bread in it. So that's why he says the bread is prohibited. Unlike Chachamim there that say no, the fuel doesn't go into the bread, and you could eat the bread even then in the first batch. Okay, but for the Rabbi who says that the fuel does go into the bread, that's about bread. What if in that oven you also made some bowls, cups, and flasks out of clay, and now every time you use that bowl, you're benefiting from avodah zarah. And Rabbi would agree, because in that case, there's no zeva ze gorem. This bowl has the benefit of the heat of orlah in it, and every time I fill up the bowl and use it to hold something, I am benefiting from the hardening of that bowl, which is prohibited. There's no other source. So he would agree. The question is as follows: regarding an oven and also a pot, a cooking pot, because an oven and a cooking pot, they're only useful in the future when I heat them up. And so in the future, when I heat them up, so now I'm going to have food in the pot, and that is going to be deriving benefit from the pot itself, which was made in a prohibited way and has bad heat in it, right? But also the new fuel, which is going to be good fuel. And so whatever I'm cooking in the pot or in the oven is going to be a combination, zeva ze gorem. And if Rabbi thinks that zeva gorem is mutar, then an oven and a pot would be permitted. Good. Leman damar ze v'ze gorem asur, asur. Leman damar ze v'ze gorem mutar, shareh. Okay, that's one version, but there's another way to think about the pot. Ika da'amre afilu leman damar ze v'ze gorem mutar, kedera asura. Dahakibela bishula mikame dinitan asim tehetera. So even according to the one who says that the two causes is okay, the pot still, you put the food in the pot before it gets warm. So the pot already has use, like a bowl. And so you're already using the pot by itself without any other cause. And so therefore, the pot itself would be problematic. Unlike an oven doesn't hold things. And so an oven is only ever used or useful when it's hot. And so it's hot with permitted material, that's going to be a zegorem. And then, so the oven will be okay, but the pot might be like a bowl. All right, very good. Now, Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Okay, what we're going to see now is Shmuel's version of the Baraita. This Baraita here, where the bee was prohibited, and the sages permit. Shmuel has another version of this Baraita with the opinions reversed. This is very curious. Why did Shmuel have a reversal? Okay, it's actually one of the most important statements we'll learn about the methodology of the Amoraim. So in the name of Shmuel, he says, Tanur shesiko beklipe orlah or bekashin shel kila kedem. Right, so you made again with orlah or kila kedem, the pieces of wood, twigs from it. Hadash yutas yashan yusan. I like the poetry of it. Right, they remembered their halachot and rhyme. Afal bo atapat, Rabbi omer hapat muteret. Okay, so now if you baked bread in that oven with prohibited fuel, the Rabbi says the bread's okay, you're allowed to eat it. And Chachamim are the ones that say it's prohibited. Okay, that's the end of the Baraita. And this is the opposite. V'hatanya ipecha. We had the different version, the opposite. You're right, Shmuel ipecha taneh. Shmuel's version, yeah, that's his tradition. He has it the other way around. So maybe that's simply the tradition that he got from his teacher, who got it from his teacher. And somewhere along the line, we're not sure what happened. There are two different versions. But even there's another version of this answer. Okay, so we have two different versions of an answer to explain why there's two different versions of a machloket that has two opinions. So we have rules because we want to know, who to follow when there is machloket. And he had a rule that we always follow the B. He's a biuda nasi, and when he's in a controversy with one of his colleagues, the B wins. The B wins over any other single person. But if he has the majority against him, the B against 2 or against 3, no, then you follow the majority. That's what he thought in general. And therefore, he actually had the same version of the Baraita that we had. And in that version, the B is Mahmir, and you have Chachamim. So according to his general rule, you would go by Chachamim, and you would be lenient, and you would eat this bread. And so that's what we would say here. However, he didn't want that to be the halacha. He wanted to teach that the halacha in this case is stringent. And therefore, how's he going to say that? He's going to say, listen, in general, in this case, this is an exception to the rule. People aren't going to know, they're not going to understand. And so he taught the Baraita on purpose in reverse, and thereby, and I guess misrepresenting what Rabbi actually said. The purpose would be that he can assign the prohibited opinion to the majority, and then everybody would know, oh, that's the majority opinion. The halacha follows that opinion, and it's prohibited. So you see that the goal of Shmuel's goal in transmitting the Baraita was not to accurately represent the actual opinions. His goal in transmitting the Baraita was to teach a halacha l'ma'aseh. And so that was more important than getting the historical accuracy of their opinions correct. Okay, this is extremely important because, we find the Geonim say this too, that the Yehuda Nasi himself, when he has different opinions, he'll assign one of them as the majority, even if then the Tosefta parallel wasn't the majority. So they would often assign the majority in order to indicate that is the halacha l'maaseh. So when we see that Chachamim say something, doesn't necessarily mean that they actually sat around in a circle and voted, and that was the majority opinion. In a way, it's an assigned majority opinion. Okay, so we see that happen, and now we see the Gemara itself acknowledges that this is a methodology that at least Shmuel uses, and probably others too. All right, good. That was extremely important. And now we're talking about dim coals or glowing coals, right? At the very end, the last case of that Baraita said that everyone agrees that if you bake something on the coals, it's okay because the coals are not the substance anymore, right? Once chametz is burned down to ashes, it's not chametz anymore. So now you can derive benefit. Same with orlah. So bishalal gabek yachalim dibra kol hapat muteret. Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel v'Rav Chiya bar Asher Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So we have Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. They're contemporaries, one from Bavel, one from Eretz Yisrael. They each had an opinion about this. We're not sure who said which. Chad Amar lo shanu ela gechalim omimot. Aval gechalim lo hashot asurin. So this is only true if it's dim coals, but if they're glowing coals, lo hashot literally means whispering. But I guess when you whisper, it sounds like a little bit louder, softer. So these are glimmering or glowing coals. So this is only true that it's allowed when the coals are very dim. And in other words, they're barely anything anymore. They're just ashes. But if the coals still have some fire in them, the litmus test would be if you take a twig and put it in, would it light on fire? If it would, then that's still called glowing. Then that's not good because then it's still substantive enough that you can't derive benefit from it. That's one of them. Other opinion, another opinion says even if they're glowing, it's still fine, right? It's still considered ashes. It's not the original object, and it's okay. All right, let's analyze these two. The one who says that the glowing coals are prohibited, well, it's still something that is substantive, and you are deriving benefit from it, and that's going into that heat energy that's going into the bread makes it not allowed. If you say the glowing ones are okay to use, pat de asar. So then, according to Rabbi, right, who says that the energy goes in, if you're saying that lochashot, even glowing, which is the higher degree of fire, is permitted, then in what case would Rabbi say it's not permitted, right? This is like the highest level that we've seen so far. So the Papa answers, no, when it's a real fire, when the fire is coming out, right, an entire flame, and you bake on top of the flame, then clearly that's the orlah wood, that is, energy is going in. But even glowing is a step below that, and that's where the Rabbi would agree that it's okay, according to that opinion. All right, wait a second, according to that means the lower two levels, dim and glowing, is totally permitted according to everybody. Rabbi, who says that the energy fire goes into the bread, that's talking about an actual flame being there. Now, when we have Rabbanan, who say, no, the fire doesn't go in. So what case is he talking about, right? Because nothing higher than a fire. So when would you ever have a prohibition of benefit from wood, right? And the answer is actually never from cooking. Anytime you cook with something, you're burning it. And the second you burn it, it's already not the substance that it was. So according to the Rabbanan, anything cooked with chametz, orlah, all those kinds of wood would be okay. But there are types of woods that you can't derive benefit. How would you derive benefit? Oh, we're talking about when you build a stool out of it, right? If you build a bench out of a piece of wood and you sit on the bench, that's when it's talking about, but not actually when you cook with it. Okay, very good. So that's that case. And now that we've that was the last section of the Baraita. Now we finished the Baraita, we're going to ask a few further questions about closely related things, which is what an oven fueled with Hekdesh. Something that is even a higher status of prohibition than orlah that we've been talking about so far. So this doesn't get into the question of Meilah. Meilah means it's a special prohibition of deriving benefit from something that's consecrated. Something in the Bet HaMikdash money that's in the money donated to the Bet HaMikdash. If I take it for myself, I violate Meilah. It's very serious. You have to bring a korban and all that. Okay, we'll see a difference between that and Shelamim, where Meilah does not apply. Okay, so let's see the case. Ba'amine Rami bar Chama merav Chisda tanur shesiko be'aseh hekdesh va'afa bo hapat l'Rabbanan desharu bekamaita mai. So I have an oven and I used fuel of Hekdesh, right? Fuel that was wood that was donated to the Bet HaMikdash. And now I take that wood, I steal that wood, and I bake my own bread in it, right? Would that bread be okay? According to the Rabbi who said the orlah wood is not okay, for sure this would not be okay. But according to the Banan, who say the fire of the wood does not go into the bread, would he say that also regarding Hekdesh? Amale hapat asura. His answer was prohibited. Why? Uma ben zoda orlah. How come this one no good and orlah you said was good? They said it was good. Amarava hachi hashta orlah betela b'matayim. Hekdesh afilu be'elef la batel. Right? Orlah 1 in 200 is batel. So whatever little bit of heat energy you call that is batel. But something that's Hekdesh, this wood that was donated Bet HaMikdash, even 1 in 1,000 would not be batel. So it's much more stringent, and therefore that heat energy from that wood would make the bread prohibited, even according to Hachamim, who don't say that regarding orlah. Okay, now Ela Madava Ikashele Hakashya. So the Rabbi was bothered even by the question, like that's such an obvious question that can't be really what they asked. Rather, I have a better question that they could have asked or should have asked. Halo ma'al hamasik v'chol hecha de ma'al hamasik nafku lechulin. Very interesting, a special law regarding Meilah. Meilah, if I do steal something and use it for my own purposes, let's say wood or whatever from the Bet HaMikdash, in the process of taking it, that thing loses its Hekdesh status. It's no longer Kadosh. As a result, I do have to pay for it and add another penalty, another fifth, and I have to bring a korban, right? But that thing itself is no longer Kadosh. And so therefore, that's the question that they were asking. When I take wood from the Bet HaMikdash and I use it for my own purposes, I am violating Meilah, but the wood itself is no longer consecrated. And therefore, that heat from the wood that goes and benefits the bread shouldn't be a problem, right? And that's his question. Does it become a problem or not? Okay, so to answer this question, Amar Rav Papa, Hacha be'aseh Shelamim askinan, Valibad Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, to say that in this case it would still be okay, permitted, we can assume that it was wood that would go along with a Shelamim sacrifice. A Shelamim is a Kodashim Kalim. This is like a Korban Todah. I'm thankful for something, so I want to make a barbecue. So I bring this, and some sections go to the Bet HaMikdash, to the Mizbeach and to the Kohanim, but most of it I can eat with my friends. Now this kind of Shelamim, and if I donate wood together with it, it has the same status. The wood itself does not actually become Hekdesh until they sprinkle the blood of the Shelamim. So it has a bit of a lower status than other things. And we're going to follow in this case the Yehuda. We bring an analogy. The Amar Hekdesh b'shogeg mitchalel b'mezid eno mitchalel. So this is interesting. Hekdesh, if I have something that's Hekdesh and I take from it by mistake, then that's called Meilah, and the thing that was Kadosh loses its sanctity, and now it's Chol. But if I did it on purpose, then it doesn't work. In other words, Meilah only applies when I did it by mistake. If I do it on purpose, it's even worse, and I don't get a chance to atone with Meilah. This is true of most sacrifices. I only bring a chatat offering. If I did it by mistake, then I can bring a chatat, I can atone. If I did it on purpose, you don't get a chance to be able to do that. And so here, so let's see. B'mezid my ta'ama lo, kevan de lav bar meilahu, la nafek lechulin. So when I steal something on purpose, it's not even considered within the category of Meilah, and therefore it remains Hekdesh and doesn't go to Chulin. Only Shogeg does the category of Meilah apply. That's the analogy. And now we're going to apply the same thing to Shelamim. Shelamim nameh, kevan de lav bar Meilanin hu La nafka lecholin, because the Shelamim offering is a lower level offering, and before it's sprinkled and done, it's not Meilah if I would take from it. And therefore, since it's not Meilah if I take from that wood, when I burn it, it doesn't lose its sanctity, right? So the law of Meilah does not apply to Shelamim wood when it's not yet fully processed. And so therefore, if it is Hekdesh, right? Just talking about a case of Hekdesh, and yet it would still be prohibited, even though I took from it illegally. Okay, so that would be an answer to that question. Now, just something about that presumption itself. Is this true that in general, when Meilah does apply, that the thing that I took loses its sanctification and becomes non-sacred? B'hatanya kol hanisrafin efran mutar chutz me'aseh Asherah ve'efer hekdesh le'olam asur. Anything that's burnt, its ashes are allowed, because like orlah, right? Once it's reduced to ashes, it's not itself anymore, and so it's allowed, except for Asherah, because that is that's idolatry, a higher prohibition, and also ashes of Hekdesh are always prohibited. Always prohibited. Sounds like this is talking about any type of Hekdesh remains, even if it violated Meilah. And so this goes against the assumption that Meilah takes away the Hekdesh status. So how are we going to answer that? Amar Rami bar Chama kegon shenafla deleka me'eleha be'aseh Hekdesh. Deleka enash dinim all. So it could be a case where I have wood that's itself is sanctified, but no one did it on purpose. No one lit them on fire. Fire broke out, and it happened by themselves. Now they're reduced to ashes. Well, in that case, there was no Meilah, because there was no one that violated, right, that did it on purpose, that stole it. And so that's the case I was talking about when it says Efer Hekdesh L'olam Asur, only in that case. But in fact, if someone went and did it by mistake, and it was a case of Meilah, then it would take away its sanctification. So we could limit this Baraita in order to fit with the rule. Rav Shemaya Amad Be'otan she'te'onin geniza. He says another possibility, the ashes that you have to put away. The Tanya v'samo benachat, v'samo kulo, v'samo shelo yefazer. This is the pasuk we were talking about yesterday from about Terumah Hadeshin, that the leftovers that you burn on the Mizbeach, you have to take those ashes and you have to put them on the ground next to the Mizbeach, and they have to stay there. And so we learn from the word v'samo there that you have to put them there nicely and not spread them all around. And so that is a special law regarding those sacrifices that are burnt on the Mizbeach, and those ashes are always remain asur, but specifically talking about those. But in other cases, like in the Meilah case, in fact, it would, that Hekdesh, that Kedusha status would in fact be removed. Okay, the daf is almost finished, and the next section is going to take us on a long Kal Vachomer that goes into the next one. So we'll start that Kal Vachomer tomorrow. Baruch Adonai L'olam, Amen ve'amen.